Again, we will be talking about why faith is timeless in 2021. I don't know if you ever really thought about faith being timeless, faith not ending. So if you haven't, we're really about to dig into this. If you got any questions, if you got any comments, make sure you put them down below and I will try my best to see them. But we will be coming from, we're still in the relationship saga. We're still dealing in Hebrews with the pioneers of faith. And today we will be coming from Hebrews 11, 11 through, I mean, not 11, Hebrews 11, 13 through 14. And it reads like this. All these died in faith, not having received the promise, but having seen them afar, we were persuaded of them and embraced them and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on this earth. For they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. The word of God has been read, so you know how we do. Grab your coffee, grab your water, grab your juice, grab your soda, grab whatever it is that you're going to grab. Hey, Minister Walker, how you doing? Come on, y'all. Let's table talk. Yeah, let's put this pure truth on the table, y'all. So I've been teaching this for about, feels like forever now. So I'm just going to reiterate one more time just in case you missed it. I don't know, you may have, but the word faith, we see these died in faith. The word faith does not only mean believe, it has a component in front of it, and it means the moral convictions about the truthfulness of the word of God. Moral being knowing the difference between right and wrong. So when God is speaking to us, he's going to tell us the right things that we need to do in order to live healthy, successful relationships. It's God's guidance telling us the right thing in order to put us into the position to have healthy relationships. This is what faith is, having a proper understanding. Knowing that his guidance or his instructions is what's best for us, and knowing that that the guidance and the instructions is what's best for those that are around us also. Now, we talked about Abraham, we talked about Sarah, back to back 2 weeks, and now they're coming back in this passage. So just a reminder, we talked about Abraham and the wrongdoings that he did. We're going to talk about wrongdoings. First wrongdoing that we're going to talk about is Abraham. He gave his wife to Pharaoh. So that's one of the wrongdoings that he did. Do you remember that? We talked about that. Pharaoh saw his wife and he desired his wife, and Abraham feared for his life. So what he did was he lied to Pharaoh, put Pharaoh in a very awkward position where God had to judge Pharaoh for the wrongdoing that Abraham did, because he lied and said, instead of that being my wife, it was my sister. He gave Pharaoh his wife. Look here, I ain't giving nobody my wife. I'm just saying, hey, kill me. You're going to have to kill me, because I'm not freely. Nah, that ain't happening. So the next wrongdoing that we're going to talk about real quick is Sarah. Sarah gave her husband to Hagar. What is this, them giving their spouses to other people? What is really good, to the point that Sarah gave Hagar to be Abraham's wife? We talked about that last week. So these are the wrong things, and we're pointing out the wrong things because people think you have to be perfect to live in faith, but faith is not excluded from you when you're in the wrong. And Abraham and Sarah is a good example of this. And to even continue on, we talked about Isaac and Jacob. We know Isaac is the son of Abraham and Sarah. This is going to be weird. Isaac had a son. Or actually, he had two sons. He had twins, Jacob and Esau. And in this story, I'm just going to do a brief summary. In this story, they were even battling in the womb. Like before they were born, they were against each other. They were fighting each other. They didn't like each other. So they grew up with this battle. Now, because Esau was the firstborn. Now we're going to talk about something called birthright. Esau was guaranteed the birthright because he was the firstborn. Now, what's a birthright? A birthright gives the firstborn the he becomes the heir of the family. He gets the top position. He's responsible for the money, for the food, for the whole family business. That's what the birthright. The birthright makes you responsible over everything about your family. Now, Esau was the hunter. Esau was a hunter. He was more concerned about hunting, where Jacob was more of the quiet type. He was more to himself. He was more, laid backish, where Esau was the total opposite. But they were always fighting each other. Now, there comes a point where Esau is so hungry that Jacob is cooking something, and when he comes back from hunting, he asks Jacob, "Could you give me something to eat?" Now, Jacob here, and I'm telling this story to show you how people have a past. Jacob here decides to trick his brother into giving up his birthright. What is he asking him to give up? He's asking him to give up his heir. He's asking him to give up being guess we could say, the top dog, the one that's over the family after their father Isaac dies. So, being hungry, Esau gives up his birthright because he wants the food. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people say that Esau was out of order for giving up the birthright. Jacob was out of order for, and don't forget, Isaac, this is coming from Isaac, both of these children coming from Isaac, who was the promised child of Abraham. So this birthright also is part of the promise. It's part of the promise that God gave to Abraham, that went to Isaac, that supposedly went to Esau, and eventually went to Jacob. So he also, this is good. He also gave up on the promise. He gave up on the promise, but let's just say he didn't understand what he was giving up. He was hungry and he wanted the food. So Jacob is also known as a trickster. He tricked his brother into giving up the birthright so he could be the top dog. So later on, we see that Isaac is on his deathbed. And with him being on the deathbed, he wants to bless his firstborn, the one with the birthright. And I'm not even quite sure that Isaac even understood what the brothers had did. There's nowhere that say that he knew that he gave up his birthright. So he goes to Esau. Well, he's blind and dying. So Esau comes to him at his request. And doing that, he tells him, "Before I die, I want you to do one thing for me. I want you to cook up that meal. Cook me up a meal. You know, the one that I like, the one you cook so well. I want you to go hunt me something." That's what he do. He loves to hunt. Hunt, kill it, cook it, and give it to me so I can bless you. Now, when we look at this word bless, and I know I'm giving you a lot of information. You probably have to go back and watch this a couple of times. But when we look at this word blessed, the word blessed, and we're in Hebrew, we're in Genesis here. If you want to go back, Genesis 16, I want to say. 16 or 26. But when we look at this word blessed in the Hebrew, it means to speak well of. So Esau he was supposed to have the birthright, but he gave that up. So to add something to it, the word blessed means I want to speak well of. So he wanted to tell everyone or speak well of his son being, after he dies, you're going to be next. That's what he wanted to do. So they had a mother. Her name was Rebecca. She overheard Isaac telling Esau this. So she goes and get her son Jacob and tell him I need you to put on some wool so you can feel like your brother. because Esau, and don't lose me with this, because Esau was a hunter, he really didn't bathe. He really didn't keep himself. And this is how you can tell the difference. Esau was hairy, kind of like this, but probably more. And Jacob was smooth skinned. So what happened was his mother told him, put wool on your arm so you can feel like your brother. And we're going to stink you up a little bit. Go find his clothes, put it on so you can smell like him so you can get his birthright. Look here. The mother, Rebecca, and Jacob were tricksters. They tricked their father, who was blind and on his deathbed, to get the blessing to solidify the birthright. Now, let's talk about this real quick. There are times where, and here's the thing, Esau was used to hunting. That was his thing. That was his comfort zone. But Jacob was more on, and I want to say he was more of the responsible one. He was not even responsible. He was the one that was looking to see how everything went. And they say Esau was out of order for giving up his birthright. It's some commentaries and some people that have that. But Esau did not want the responsibility. There's a lot of responsibility when it comes to taking care of. He had to take care of the money. He had to take care of the family. He had to make sure everybody was good. How many of you today want to make sure everybody is good? This is relationships. He gave up on the promise of relationships. Now, was he wrong? I can't say if he was wrong or right, because 9 times out of 10 today, we don't even want to have to deal with the responsibilities of other people. So we can't say he was wrong, but I can say I understand. But he didn't see the full picture of the promise that God was putting in his hand. So Esau don't get the birthright. He don't get the blessing. So Jacob, a lot of people say Jacob was wrong. This is his brother. This is family. His mother and his brother conspired against him to screw him out of the birthright and the blessing. So not only did he get him with the birthright, they got him with the blessing, where the father speak well of. So it is so tough when you speak a blessing. When you speak well over one person, you can't give them the same blessing. You know how some of us we say the same thing over and over to different people. You couldn't do that back then. You can't copy paste. Everyone needed their own personal blessing. They needed their own personal words that spoke well of them. So Esau like that, okay, and he understood this principle. He said, don't give me the same blessing that you gave my brother, because when he came and he realized that he missed out, Isaac realized it felt bad, and Esau realized it felt bad. So he's like, give me a blessing also. But he couldn't give him the same blessing that he gave Jacob. He had to give him something that someone even called a watered down blessing. Like he didn't even get a good blessing. It was a violation almost, that he couldn't even speak well of his son like he wanted to, because he was tricked by his wife and his son. So 2 people, this is relationships. 2 people was tricked. The father was tricked, Isaac and Jacob, by Esau and Rebekah. So that's that story. And I always do this to myself with this time. I swear I do. So we said all that to say that was them in the past. We saw that, hey, this was days of our lives. We saw a whole lot of drama. That was a whole lot of drama from the womb to they daddy tomb. There was drama all the way through this thing. It was trickery, manipulation, all of this, but yet they're still put in the position that we see in Hebrews 11, that they still walked in faith. So it don't matter this is for someone. It doesn't matter what you did in your past. Your past is your past. If you manipulated people, if you tricked someone, if you lied on somebody, if you hurt somebody, there is still an opportunity for you to get the full guidance that God has for you, how to start treating people right today. We talked about that on Sunday on Movement Underground. Right now faith. What is right now faith? Right now you start following the instructions and you start believing, and I'm going to show you how to do all this. You start believing in what God says. So we're going to go to our first word. In order to operate in faith, what they did, how they died in faith, they said these died in faith. They died in faith because they were persuaded. The word persuaded means to be convinced. Now, if you remember, I said this is the same this sounds like the same definition of faith. To be convinced, to be convicted. Wait a minute, rewind it back and slow it down. Same Greek definition of faith as being convinced or convicted about the truthfulness of what God has for you, the promise, his word, when it pertains to yourself and not only you, for those who are around you, your family, your friends, even when you've manipulated them. God can give you a way to mend and to fix stuff that you've messed up. Wait a minute, rewind it back and slow it down again. Then they embraced. The Greek application for the word embrace means to enfold in your arms. I'm folding my arms. So that means whatever's in between here, it's not going nowhere because it's enfolded and it's pressed against me. In your arms in a welcoming gesture. So you have to welcome God's guidance in your life by entrapping it in a welcoming way. And you welcome it by doing this. You're bringing it in. You're embracing, you're welcoming, you're bringing in God's guidance. So that is how they were able to die in faith. They took it in. They took in what God said. They took it in a way that they trusted. So once you trust, you embrace it. You bring it in. You're in love with it. It's a part of you. That's how they died in faith. But I said I'm going to give you 3 tips on what keeps you from faith. But just picture this real quick. Faith also embraces us. Just like we can embrace faith, faith can embrace us. Faith wants to embrace us. Faith is always available for us to embrace it. But when we're doing the things that we're doing, we're not welcoming and embracing. And what do I mean? When we're doing things opposite of what God is telling us that we should be doing pertaining to other people. This is all relational. But sometimes we let habits block relational. This is what I mean. 3 things that keeps us from faith, keeps us from hearing God's guidance, embracing God's guidance when it comes to relationships. An out of control schedule. That's number 1. What do I mean by that? Let's look at Esau. Esau thing was hunting. So I can imagine his schedule was crazy because he was always looking for the next good game. Game being food, meat, whatever, that was his focus. So because he was so focused on that, his schedule was so busy that he didn't understand the full promise of what God had told him. Maybe because he didn't spend enough time with his dad so he could tell him. And then again, Jacob, we don't know that Jacob understood the full promise, because if you understood the full promise, why would you mess with God's promise like that? So an out of control schedule, being too busy, being too all over the place. You don't have time to study your word. That keeps you from understanding faith, and you cannot get faith off of what someone else is telling you. Excuse me. You cannot get faith off of just watching these programs or watching these broadcasts and expecting it to work. No, you have to put some time and some work in. You have to study to show yourself, not even to prove. You have to show yourself to understand the promises of God. And the only way you're going to understand the promises of God, because there's a difference between you telling me what God is saying and me discovering it for myself. Let's get into a discoverable state where we're receiving the revelation from God on our own. Number 2, the second thing is misplaced love. And we understand love means benevolence. Benevolence is support. How do we support? So we have misplaced support. How do you have misplaced support? Your support is misplaced when it's selfish. Jacob was selfish. Jacob did everything that he could to trick everybody. And he's known as a trickster. And he didn't only just trick his family, he tricked a lot of people. If you read on it, he tricked a lot of people. And when you're tricking someone, when you're doing things like being conceiving, being a snake, you're being selfish and your support is placed in the wrong place. Esau, his support was supposed to be with his family, but he gave up the birthright. He gave it up because he didn't understand the importance of support in relationships. He was only thinking about what made me come. Sometimes having our support in the right place puts us in an uncomfortable position. And a lot of times when we don't want to deal with something, we do the same thing. We give up our birthright. We go the other way. We were like, well, I ain't got to deal with that, so I'm going over here. When it's concerned to the promise being healthy relationships, the promise being who we are dealing with, who we are trying to help, who we are trying to support in a way that we all can be better. So misplaced support. Your misplaced support could be you're not worried about your first home. You're not worried. Misplaced support is you ain't even taking care of yourself. You got to take care of yourself in order to take care of others. It's a lot to this, but let's go to the next one. The last one, the third thing, is discouragement. Discouragement that can keep us from faith. I can see Esau discouraged. I can see Isaac discouraged. Both of them got tricked. When you're on the other side of the trickery, discouragement is bound to set in. Then some other stuff after that, anger, frustration. It was to the point where he was so angry, Esau, that Rebecca had to get Jacob out and away from his brother because he wanted to kill him because of the trickery. And later on, both of them still got their blessing from God, but still, we talked about it last week, impatient with the promise. Do we know they understood the promise? No, we don't, but you still have common sense. Jacob had to know that what he was doing was just wrong. Esau, he was in a bad predicament, in a bad situation. We've all been there. We made bad decisions, but them three things kept them from faith. But it kept them from faith, but they were able to still come back from that. So here's the key part to moving forward. In 15, it uses the statement. It says, read this real quick. And truly they have been mindful of the country whence they came from, thinking of the past. This is talking about the past. You can't focus on the past and see faith. If they would have continued to stick to the past, which they came out of, they may have had the opportunity to go back. So sometimes looking in the past make you want to go back to the past, go back to the deception, go back to the trickery, go back to being misused, going back. No, if they would have looked back, they probably would have went back. The purpose of faith is to move forward and look forward. So we can't look back. We have to look forward. You saw what happened to Sarah when she looked back at Sodom and Gomorrah. There's something about looking back. God said, go forward and don't look back. Again, guidance and instructions from God. He said do something, but we like to do the other thing. We have to look forward. So let's see where I'm at. I think I am there. So let's go ahead and break this down full circle. So Hebrews 11 and 13 reads like this. They all died with the proper understanding from God about relating and not having received the promise, but having seen it from afar. And were convinced of his promise and welcomed them and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on this earth. For they that say such things declare plainly that they are looking for a home. So we look at that scripture and we see that they talk about being pilgrims, being strangers. What they were saying was they were not familiar with this territory. We talked about that. So they also was going from place to place. They did not see the promise. Remember, I said the promise was given to Abraham and passed to Isaac, then it went to Jacob and Esau. So they didn't see the promise, but yet they died and they still believe. This is for someone right here. Just because you don't see the promise don't mean the promise is not given to you or those who are around you. The promise you may not see the promise, but the promise is still in your family. So if the promise is still in your family, somebody has to tell the family about it. Someone has to hold the family together. Someone has to have the proper understanding of who God is and bring your family. And I hear you now. I hear you. What if they ain't listening? What if they ain't hearing me? I get it. But it's still our responsibility to do right and don't do the things, the backstabbing things, the trickery that we saw go on in the story that we talked about before. So they all died in faith because they had a proper understanding of God and how to relate with one another. So that's how Sarah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, that's how they died in faith. It wasn't about their past. It was about what God said and how they manifested and how they were obedient and how they manifested the promise that God had told them, especially when it comes to relationships. So that's then. So does faith die? Faith can't die because faith is the word. And God's word is always here. It's always around. Are we embracing it? Or are we looking back at our past and just worried about where I came from rather than where I'm going? That's it for me, y'all. This has been an interesting turn of events because, hold on, put that back up. What's going on, Sean? The promise is in all our families. Take ownership. I like that. And thank you. Thank you. Oh, at me at this. The promise is not just for believers. The promise is available to non-believers who get the proper understanding and get the embrace the truthfulness of God's word. And I'm gonna say this and I'm done. Just because you're a believer don't mean you're embracing the promise. If Table Talk has done anything in this show in why faith is timeless in 2021, if this show has touched and agreed with you in any way, you know what I'm going to ask you to do. Give me 3 emojis. Give me 3 emojis. And next week, we still on Isaac, and we're going to talk about Isaac and Jacob. We're going to take it back to the sacrifice. It's some stuff about that story that I really want to dig deep into. I don't know where I'm going yet. Matter of fact, and this is why you should read the devotion. The link is in the description. My wife just said that, dude, your whole show today, you went a totally different direction than you did in the devotion. Hey, you can't just skip that and think you're going to get it all right here, because you never know what happened. God can take it and change it all the way around, and that's what happened here, and it happens almost every week. You don't believe me? Ask Duran, because he. Let me shut up. No, because he's probably the only one that reads the devotion. I know Shell reads it too if she don't hear. But anyways, my wife. But I make you read it before it come out. My wife just looked at me crazy, so it's time for me to wrap it up. Thank y'all for the emojis. I will see y'all next week where we will be talking about, like I said, Isaac and Jacob again, and something about faith and relationships. So I'm your host, Mr. Table Dog Javon Lawrence, and just remember, It's my job to walk you to the door. The rest is up to you. Peace, and I will see you on next week.